Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our APOE webinar. Very exciting one today, and we can see by the number of people that responded that this really is a topic that we all want to know more about. So we've brought in the big guns today. We've got a really nice agenda for today for the next 2 hours. So I'm going to be more facilitating than teaching, which is my favorite role. And just to give you a sense of what we are going to be doing today, is we're going to start off with Annelies. So Annelies prepared a presentation around what is APOE, what is the risks associated with APOE, what are the different genotypes. Obviously, we're looking at risk around Alzheimer's, around cardiovascular disease, looking at some percentages, and then she's going to actually look at some of the dietary interventions and lifestyle interventions, nutraceuticals, and then we're going to finish off with a case study, quite an interesting case study, just to put it into context of how we use it with the 3x4 report. At 10 o'clock, we will be joined by Craig Golding. Craig is going to be running a cognitive health course in the near future, and I've asked him to join us to tell us a little bit about the course and what it'll entail and what will be covered and when it's happening and all the details, because it's I'm pretty sure it's going to be an excellent course. And then at 10:30, I've asked Dr. Julie Eklund to join us. Now, you've all heard Julie talk, I'm sure. And Julie, quite some time ago, started delving much deeper into APOE, cognitive health, Alzheimer's prevention, and I've asked her to come online because she has almost found a place for herself to specialize in the space of cognitive health. I wanted her to share her journey, which many of you might be wondering, how do you get into functional medicine? How do you get into cognitive health? How do you deal with Alzheimer's? So Julie we'll be doing a little interview with Julie to ask her some questions about how this journey led her to where she is now and what that looks like. But we're going to start off with the more sciencey side of the webinar today. I'm going to hand over to Annalie. I am sitting right here, so you might hear me, hopefully not interfering, but asking questions of Annalie where I think that something needs clarity or needs more, it needs a comment from me. Nothing unusual for that, but definitely for about the next 45 minutes, we'll be doing that with Annalie. We'll definitely keep time for questions. So you will see on your panel that you're able to ask questions that I will keep a note of. And then when Annalie's finished, we'll start answering your questions. If you're battling with the Zoom webinar chat, because at the bottom of your screen, they should see a little chat, which is where you type your questions. If you're battling with that, feel free to send a question on the network, and I'll make sure that we have it and we can deal with it. Okay, Annalie, are you ready?
Ready.
All right, let's hit the button.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just share my screen with you now, so just hang on a second. Start at the beginning. Right. Our title is Don't Lose Your Mind Over APOE, and we know that also, like Yael said, from the number of participants that's joining, we know that it's really a hot topic, and it's just one of those genes that people talk about so much, and that a lot of people actually come for the test just to find out about APOE. And I must say, for me, preparing for this webinar, I also had to go back and read all the literature that I could find to lay my hands on APOE. And again, there's so much that we don't know, and there's a lot of that are still coming out. So let's see how we can get through this today. Right, so the outline of our talk, and this was in your invite. I just quickly want to go over it for those of you who haven't read it recently. So we're going to look at the function of APOE. So like Yael said, this is going to be our sciencey part to see, and also what different variations can be inherited. We are then going to look at the health risks associated with APOE. Well, obviously everybody talks about the risk for cognitive decline and Alzheimer's, but I'll just briefly go into a few other conditions that's also associated. We'll also this is a big question we get a lot is what to tell your patients before testing for APOE. And this is quite important that we don't just test them and afterwards maybe get a result where there's an APOE 4E4 and now having to backtrack and think, what am I going to tell my patient? Either brushing over it or maybe freaking out about it. So it's really important that we deal with that up front. And we're going to also see what we have to address when somebody has got an APOE specifically. What are the things we're going to address and what are we going to communicate about the risk for Alzheimer's? And also what the steps are people can take in terms of prevention. We're going to look at clinical support for clients with APOE4. So I'm going to do 2 case studies, and we're going to go through the diet recommendations, lifestyle recommendations. I just want to say I've only got about 40 minutes, so I'm going to go through as much as possible, but there will be a lot of stuff that you might want to know after, and you're welcome to contact us. So now, just to start off, some of you might recognize this picture from if you've done the Manuka course or the Foundations course, and I really just want to start with the basics, so we all get onto the same page of what is apolipoprotein. So this is just a picture. We've got different apoproteins. We've got apolipoprotein A, apolipoprotein B, and then apolipoprotein E, which is what we're going to talk about today. So the apoprotein is really the protein that binds the lipids. So if you can imagine this red part here on this picture is the apoprotein. So there's the actual protein. Apo actually means to take off or to remove. So that's, or detach really. So apo means detach. So the red part here would be the protein that is the apoprotein, and then these other little dots here are the lipids. So the way I always explain it to my clients is like, think of this as a bus. So the protein is a bus, and those little lipid droplets gets onto the bus, and the apoprotein is, you can almost imagine as a bus driver. So that is what's going to determine how this protein functions. So the APOE, so this is a little bit of a complicated slide, but it's quite nice to actually see what apoprotein, specifically the apoprotein E structure looks like. So you'll see it's actually got 2 parts. It's got a receptor binding part, and APOE specifically can bind to LDL receptors. That is this yellow part here. And then the other part is the lipid binding region, where it binds with lipids. So there's actually 2 parts here to it. And if you look at the different forms or the different types of APOEs that you can inherit, you get E2, E3, E4, and that is exactly where they are different at these 2 binding sites, at the yellow part and the red part. They actually differ from each other, and that is how they actually then has a specific impact in terms of our lipid transport mechanisms. So this is also quite a busy slide, and I don't expect you to, this picture was really just to have a picture on my page, but just also important to understand your APOE in terms of its metabolism. So it's produced by astrocytes, which are brain immune cells in the microglia. And what was interesting to me is that it actually gets produced because of an immune reaction, and it can also sometimes, under stressful conditions, be produced in the neurons, which is something I must say I didn't know. And then the APOE receptor sites affects the clearance of the amyloid beta. So amyloid beta are these clots that forms in the brain, and that is really important, the important function of APOE to help remove these amyloid betas. Right, so then just an overview of the different genotypes. So there's, these are percentages in Caucasian populations, depending, as we know with genetics, if we look at different populations, we will see different percentages. So this was from akin, which was also what we found in our Manuka course in our SNP guides. So E2 is actually, like you can see, it's quite rare. There's 1% of population that's got E2. Then around 10% that we see E2, E3. I must say I haven't seen a lot of them myself. E3, E3 is very common, so 62%. E2, E4 also quite rare, especially because E2 is quite rare. Then E3, E4 about 20%. And then you can see that E4 can be around about 5%. So not as rare even as E2, but it is not that common. But obviously that's the one we want to address most when we see it. So then if you can look at the impact, so E2 is seen as beneficial. I just want to say something about E2. Even though it's beneficial, when you have E2 variation, it is sometimes associated with reduced clearance of triglycerides. So these are the risks associated with it. And it can then increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. But it doesn't mean that everybody with E2 has a risk. So what I've read in the literature is that if you've got an E2, you still only have a 3% risk. Then E3 is neutral. So that's the risk association. And then if you have any of the E4 copies, so you either E2, E4, E3, E4, or E4, E4, you've got a risk for higher LDL cholesterol levels. You've got an increased risk for coronary myocardial infarction and also cognitive decline. Then in terms of cellular functions, your E2 copies affects your antioxidant and anti-inflammatory capacity, so that's why it's beneficial, so it actually gives you that protection. And then if you have an E4 copy, it increases your risk for inflammation and also for oxidative stress. And that's really what we look at when we see an E4 copy in somebody's report, is to do a lot around decreasing inflammation and oxidative stress. Then just an interesting last point here, effect of moderate alcohol. We know that definitely in the past, a lot of times when people go to a practitioner, they might say to them to drink a glass of wine every night to help reduce cardiovascular risk, which we all want to hear if we like red wine. But it's interesting that if you have an E4, it can increase, alcohol can decrease your HDL and also increase your LDL cholesterol. So again, you can't give population-based guidelines if you don't know people's genetics. And that is really why we encourage people to use genetics as a screening tool before making recommendations. So this is just, I have already shown you the population averages. This is just for those of you who are more visual to have a look and see. These percentages are not exactly the same, but you can just see how rare the E2 is, and then E4 is also quite rare. So let's just quickly look again at your APOE functions, just to get your mind around, because if you're going to be talking to somebody and telling them about their genetics, you really need to get your head around what APOE actually does. So the first thing to remember is that it facilitates lipid transport between cells. So remember, there was that receptor site and there was the lipid transport part of the protein, and so that's how it facilitates. It really gathers up these lipids and it transports it between cells. So the next thing also is that it's also essential for processing, or especially breaking down of triglyceride lipoproteins. So that's important, and that's also where we see with APOE2 that you get a reduced clearance of triglycerides. The next thing is that it mediates cholesterol metabolism peripherally and also in the central nervous system. So these are two separate areas, but APOE is definitely the most important transport protein for cholesterol in the neurons. So that's also why it's so important for brain health. It's a principal carrier for cholesterol in the brain, and it's also important for glucose regulation. And that's also why if you have a report in front of you and you see there's something going on in terms of risk for glucose and insulin balance, that it's also important to address that, because that will affect brain health as well. In fact, there's quite a lot of parallels between type 2 diabetes and cognitive decline. So this is a really nice picture to show the APOE4 expression and how aging affects it. So what's interesting with cognitive decline, and maybe one of our other speakers will talk about it a little bit more, is that it seems to really kick in. Some literature say that if you look at younger people, especially with the APOE4, that you don't actually notice any changes, but it seems like around about 40 that aging starts kicking in. And what happens is there's a deficient clearance of your amyloid beta, deficient amyloid beta clearance. There's a dysregulation of the lipids, sort of actual lipid transport. Then you also see a deficient glucose metabolism, so you start seeing abnormal glucose levels. And again, remember that will also often depend on people's lifestyle, and it will also depend on other genes that affect these pathways. And then the pro-inflammatory response is also affected. So you have your astrocytes that produce the APOE4, and then when all of these expressions, especially with your APOE4, these expressions are different from your APOE3s and E2s, and that will then start increasing the risk for neurodegeneration and ultimately cognitive decline. Also a really nice picture to show lipid transport. Again, the differences between your APOE3 and APOE4. So you've got an efficient lipid transport with your APOE3 because of the way the protein is actually structured. And then with APOE4, with aging, you see that there's an inefficient lipid transport. So it's almost like the lipids that needs to be attached and transported from one cell to another is done inefficiently. That then causes problems with your neurons. Then the next thing is the oxidative stress risk. Again, a similar picture where you'll see that you have these oxidated lipids that with the APOE3 is actually repaired and you have neuron survival. And with APOE4, you've got this higher risk for increased inflammation and increased damage, and then you get the neurodegeneration. So there's the three things. There's the aging that activates it, and that's often activated also with inflammation because your astrocytes is affected by inflammation. Then your lipid transport is affected, and that also happens with aging. And the third thing was oxidative stress. That is also, you don't necessarily have to tell your clients all of this, but it's quite a good way to get your head around how all of this works. Then this is a really nice summary of the role of APOE4 in Alzheimer's disease. So you'll see on the left-hand side the gain of toxic function. So we see that there's could be an increase of brain atrophy. You can have this neuronal toxicity, which can be caused by the mechanisms that I've just explained. You've got a decreased clearance of your amyloid beta aggregation. You get this increase of tangle formation, and then the aberrant brain, increase of aberrant brain activity. So that's the gain of toxic function. And on the other side, you have a decrease of synaptic function, your glucose metabolism is affected. You have neurogenesis, the opposite of the side, so our amyloid beta clearance decreases. There could be an issue around vascular function. A very important part as well is mitochondrial function that decreases, and that is also something we can really support through lifestyle and dietary factors. And then your lipid and cholesterol metabolism decreases, so there's a dysregulation there. Right, so this is my brief slide around the disease association with APOE. So we, like I said earlier, we always think about Alzheimer's, but because APOE is so important in terms of oxidative stress, inflammation, and also lipid transport, we know that it's been associated with all these conditions. And it's not just APOE4. If you think about triglyceride clearance and its relation with glucose and insulin metabolism, with your type 2 diabetics, you could even sometimes find that if somebody has an APOE2 variant, that there could be an issue around triglyceride clearance, and that in itself will cause inflammation. We have also this risk around ischemic stroke, cardiovascular disease. So you'll see that when you look at the pathways, which we'll go through just now when we look at a case study, that the APOE4 or the APOE protein appears in our vascular pathway, and it also appears in oxidative stress, inflammation, and of course brain health. The type 3 hyperlipoproteinemia, that is the condition that I referred to earlier when you have an APOE2, especially APOE2E2 variation, which has been associated with this type 3 hyperlipoproteinemia, and that is an independent risk factor for atherosclerosis. And then the last thing is also multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease, where we know that there's a lot of issues around mitochondrial health and also lipid transport, especially with brain function.
Great.
I'm waiting for Yael.
No. She's been waiting for me to interrupt and ask something, but
so far so good.
So far so good. I'm very happy. Yeah. Always good to be reminded of the stuff. Really good. Yeah. And
hopefully you will save this somewhere and go through it again later. I know I'm rushing through it. This is just a really great slide that I got from one of the seminars I attended recently. And I actually just thought I have to put this in because it really reminds us about the gut-brain, the association between gut and brain health. And it's so interesting how not too long ago we all it was denied that there was such a big connection, sorry, I can't think of the word, connection between gut and brain. And you can see how these cells actually look so much the same. And if there's an issue around your gut histology, you will have a higher risk for the blood-brain barrier for the integrity to be disrupted. So I really just put this in, and obviously when we look later at treatment, just remember this slide and why it's so important to always look at gut health and how gut also increases your risk for inflammation so much.
And looking at that slide makes me think of the webinar we did with Christine, where we spoke about, what it really is gut health, and it wasn't just about the microbiota, but about this epithelial layer and how when it's working well, we have all the signaling with other organs in the body, and when there's a dysbiosis and dysfunction in that epithelial layer, that's actually even more important than prebiotics and probiotics. Then we get this disruption in terms of the signaling to the brain, and that slide really reminds me of that.
Yeah, so if you look at also if we think about everything always goes back to immune modulation as well. So yeah, you get your astroglial cells in the brain, which we said earlier is also what is involved in the production of APOE, and then you get your enteroglial cells in the gut, and they are always talking to each other.
Gut-brain immune. Okay.
Right, so let's look at genetic testing and have a look at some factors to consider before you test. So when I started, I said it's really important to discuss this with your patient, and Yael was telling me earlier about a situation where she had spoken to somebody for quite a while before she decided if she's actually going to.
So actually, it was a cousin of mine, my second cousin. We have a lot of, as we'll discuss later, we have a lot of Alzheimer's. I have two aunts, my brother's two sisters, who had quite early onset Alzheimer's. And I have a first cousin who lives in the States, and I was talking to her about the genetic test, and it took her quite a few months to get her head around whether or not she wanted to be tested, because she's in her 60s now, and she's wanting to know whether this, risk, and also ready to make some very significant lifestyle changes. And I spent a lot of time talking to her about the concept of APOE of 3, 4, the likelihood that her mother, who had very early onset Alzheimer's, probably had an E4, E4, that there's a chance that she's inherited definitely one E4. And we spent quite a lot of time talking about it. And eventually she did decide to test. And Annalie's been working with her, and she's made some really significant and fantastic lifestyle and diet changes. So in her case, luckily she only landed up with the E3, E4, which is what I suspected. But it's been a very positive experience for her. But it took a lot of conversation, and I'm going to hand over to Annalie for this. But this is one area where I do have obviously a strong opinion that I really believe that there's an extraordinary high value of knowing APOE. I mean, you can see the power of this gene in terms of understanding biochemistry and what's happening at a physiological level, and that there has to be a conversation around its value and what can be done and how we can mitigate any risk that we do find. So that's really one of the main reasons we wanted this APOE webinar, is not just to remind you what APOE is, but to go into this section now, which is what is the conversation that we have, what should you be talking to your patient about, what you should be talking to your patient afterwards. So for that, I'm going to hand back to Annalie.
So that also is one of the reasons why it's so important that we do also talk to people before they just do a test, and why they also don't just go direct to consumer. We often have people who come to us and just want the test done, and we always insist that they have an assessment done, and that also when we get the results that it does go through a practitioner, because you can often land up. I had a conversation with somebody recently who was sent her report. It was another report, but she was sent it. She saw she had APOE4. She went and Googled it. And by the time I spoke to her, she was completely freaked out because there was all sorts of things she read about it. But really, what we need to discuss beforehand is family history. Sometimes if there were premature deaths in the family, you don't always know if there is a history. And I have often had cases like that. I've even had people with E4, E4, and nobody in the family had cognitive decline. But when we dug deeper, that they died of for other reasons earlier. So who knows what have happened later. Then also the emotional response of the patient. So you might have some people, and we know we do sometimes have situations where it's in a judgment of the practitioner thinks that the patient is maybe too vulnerable. So that is something to take into account. But like Yael says, it's sometimes knowledge is power. Then the number of lifestyle steps that can mitigate the risk. I really talk about this a lot before I test. Before we know what the result is, we talk about this, and also other risk factors that will obviously increase risk, because we all have a lifetime risk for cognitive decline Alzheimer's. You can't say, oh, I've got to E2, I'm never going to get it. There are other risk factors as well, and that's also important, especially if somebody asks for the test and then it comes up that they didn't have an E4, and then it doesn't mean now they can just relax and not look at other things. So we must make sure that they know it's not just about APOE4. Right. So then this is also, there's a lot of different disease risk references, and sometimes they give percentages, sometimes that's your average risk in terms of how many times more likely you are, but this is more or less what we found, that if you have E2, E2, E3, that you have 40% less likely risk. Then if you have E2, E4, 2.6 times more likely. E3, E3 is an average risk because, like I said, we all have a risk. And then when you have one copy of E4, you have a 3 times higher risk. And then you can see with E4, E4, you have quite a high risk. And when you have E4, E4, we do tell people to perhaps go for genetic counseling. Right, so let's go through my treatment guide.
We're going to talk about genetic counseling again in another slide, or is this where we talk about it?
You could talk about it.
Okay. So I often get asked this question. I thought it was another slide, and maybe it is, but let's just deal with it now. So we talk about APOE as being what we call a medium penetrance gene. So most of the SNPs that are in our report are low penetrance. So by themselves, they really don't carry a very high impact in terms of manifesting. But you all know very well from your studies what penetrance means, and we regard APOE as a medium penetrance. It's not a high penetrance, there's no guarantee you're going to get, it's not 80-90%, but as you can see, when you have an E4, E4, you're talking about a 15 times more likely chance of getting Alzheimer's in your lifetime. And so this is one case where I really feel quite strongly that we need to reach out to genetic counselors. So when we are, I believe we are more than competent to do the pre-counseling. So when you're telling a patient about the test and about APOE and what it means, I think we're all well trained enough to be able to say, this is what APOE is. There's a lot of things we can do to mitigate risk. Knowledge is power. We can make changes, etc., etc. But when you have an E4, E4, there's two things. One is there's a lot you can do. So it's not like you hand it over and walk away and say, well, I'm not dealing with this, because we know that there is so much that can be done in terms of prevention and compensating for the E4, E4. But I always refer the patient to go see a genetic counselor to have a conversation with them around family, around telling other people in the family, around children, etc. So it's often happened that some of you have reached out to me to say, and not always on E4, E4, but on other high penetrance genes, and we will help you find the best genetic counselor to work with. They can be a little bit tricky. There's some that are very, very conservative and very kind of old school, but there are some really good ones as well. So please connect with us when you do have that situation. But in E4, I really, really want to see genetic counselors brought into the conversation. Okay, carry on.
Right, so like Yael said, there's a lot we can do, and that's really what I want to focus the last 10 minutes or so on. And after this, we'll take some questions. So the treatment guide, so there's often this whole idea of the 6 pillars of Alzheimer's prevention. And again, it's not just about E4, there's all sorts of other reasons. But the whole idea is to obviously optimize your diet, and definitely when you've used your genetic test as a screening tool, you can consider other gene variations and pathways, which will really help you to optimize your diet properly and also deal with other things. So that, and you'll see in my case study later, I'll explain to you how this can work. So you want to look at things like risk for toxicity, you want to look at other risks like insulin and glucose. You also want to make sure you reduce stress. We all have a lot of stress, and personalize it, see what can happen. And there's a lot written about how to reduce stress, but especially somebody who's got a risk for Alzheimer's or for cognitive decline, stress is such a big factor. Then optimizing exercise, and this, Yael always talks about having your sweet spot with exercise, because you can definitely over-exercise, and then you can also obviously not exercise enough. And that was, for instance, Yael's cousin that we spoke about. When I spoke to her, she had actually quite a good healthy lifestyle, but one of the things she wasn't really doing was moving. And this was something we really...
Yeah, I remember in our brain webinar, we spoke about how pretty much all cognitive treatment, about 50% of everything that you can do to prevent cognitive decline came from exercise. And then everything else we do was the other 50%. So exercise can't be stressed enough.
And they also talk about and if you think about brain stimulation, you can actually use exercise if you learn some new thing. You learn a new sport, or you can go and play golf or something where you need to actually use your brain a little bit more. That can be a double thing.
I would have chosen golf as an example.
I don't know. I can't play golf.
So a late selection from you.
You need to use your lens, right?
Tennis would have been a much better option than golf. Anyway, I'm not a big golf fan.
Okay, not really. Okay, so optimizing sleep. So also making sure we sleep enough, because that's when our brain detox, and that's what affects inflammation. Gut health, we already spoke about that. Obviously excluding heavy metal toxicity, which is so important for brain health. Social engagement, that's also important. People who are isolated, and that's especially if you look at the blue zones where they looked at how people live much longer, the social engagement is really important. And of course, then immune modulation. So either looking at overstimulating the immune system, or people who are on anti-inflammatories. There's quite a lot of information about non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication that also is a high risk.
Shuts down the signaling, that nice modulation.
Yeah, and if you give your patients this little picture of the 6 pillars and you literally take one at a time, it really feels quite that you really have a lot of things that you can do. Right, so some of you might recognize this book, The End of Alzheimer's. It's a really great book to read. I think it should be on everybody's bookshelf. The Bredesen protocol, and I know Julie will maybe talk a little bit more about that. So this is really what we based our dietary guidelines around. So this is just quickly what happens in the diet. So you basically have a predominantly plant-based diet. The idea is to have lots and lots of vegetables a day, but really focusing on a variety, different colors, and 10 to 15 servings. That's quite a big order. There's lots of ways to get vegetables in your diet. Of course, if somebody's not eating vegetables, you're not going to start there. You're going to start with a few and build it up. Obviously, healthy fats. So we look at the sources of fat, nuts, seeds, olive oil being really important. There's monounsaturated foods as well as polyunsaturated, or your omega-3s really. Then, and I know when we talked about gut health, there was a lot we talked about in terms of olive oil. And nuts and seeds also are really good sources of magnesium. So that's also really important for
cashew nuts and macadamia, I think.
Yes.
That was Christine's.
And pumpkin seeds.
And of course, pumpkin seeds was a really big one.
Yes.
Pepitas.
Then lean protein, like your plant-based protein, as well as getting fish. And now, of course, we worry about mercury in fish, but that's another conversation. Then having a look at low glycemic fruit, such as your berries. There's lots of other ones as well. And the other thing is your 12-hour nightly fast. We talk about 12 hours. Obviously, you individualize the fasting for people, but the whole idea is to have also the 3-hour fast before bedtime. So there's no point fasting all day, having a meal at 9 o'clock, and then thinking you're doing it right.
I'm hearing a lot of that people who have got onto intermittent fasting, they're actually fasting all day and then going home and having a massive dinner. And they're thinking that's the best way to do intermittent fasting.
Yeah, so people have got the message wrong as usual.
Yeah, that's okay.
Then avoiding the obvious things, highly processed foods, large amounts of meat and animal products. So definitely these diets that are really high in animal fats, these very high fat diets.
Not say the word.
Let's not go there.
They're not going to say the word.
And then simple carbohydrates, that's very obvious. And then also they talk about non-nutritive sweetness. Splenda must be an American one, and then gluten, depending on your tolerance.
Although there are a lot of people who say that gluten has no place in a diet to do with cognitive. But well, why don't we hold that and maybe throw it at Julie and at Craig and see what they say?
Yes. And of course, that goes back to gut health and what you want to have to achieve.
Okay. Dive into the case study.
Let's look at my case study. This guy, he looked a little bit like that. Really nice young guy. He was age 34. He actually came to me because he had a history of, he had a brain tumor that was removed 4 years prior to seeing me. They heard about the test, and he really just decided to come because of that. Then when I did his history, and of course asking about his family, it turned out that he had 2 grandparents. Both his grandmother and grandfather, his paternal side, had Alzheimer's disease. It wasn't something that he really was, until I asked him, he wasn't really bothered about it. He actually came because of the issue on cancer, because his mother had breast cancer and died at age 66. His dad was still alive, and he had high cholesterol. Right, so then that's his medical history. He had a benign brain tumor, surgically removed. He was actually a soldier. He was in the army, and he did his ultra endurance, very high stressful life at the time, and he did ultra endurance events. So his current symptoms, he was suffering from depression. He was on medication for that. He was starting to gain weight. That was something that was bothering him because it wasn't really happening before. He had this little tummy, you can't see in my picture. He also had a bit of a raised cholesterol, and you can see an abnormal HDL and LDL.
Well, I haven't joined yet. You have?
Let me just mute Craig there. Okay, then he was still doing ultramarathons. He was running his own business, travels internationally quite a few times a year, and definitely over time zones. So his circadian rhythms weren't the best. He actually wasn't sleeping very well. He had a mixed diet, he was sort of thinking he's got a healthy diet, but he did say he wasn't really mad about vegetables. He had a sweet tooth, and he was enjoying his wine a few times a week. Right, so let's look at his result. So you can imagine when I saw this result, I was like, oh dear, look at this. Because even though I knew his grandparents, I was worried about it. I did talk to him about the E4, but then he actually had the E4 variation. But besides that, he also had a double deletion and had a COMT-AA. So this was a really, really what we call heavy report. And he was one of those people where I was so happy that he actually ended up with me, or with the test, not with me, but with having actually done the test. And we actually had to do quite a few sessions going through this and getting him on the right track. So you can see here his cellular pathways, very high detox, methylation, oxidative stress. So all is interesting. The inflammation was medium, which was
lucky,
something.
One good thing,
That's right. And then if we look at the brain health and hormone balance, hormone balance obviously was affected because of COMT and your deletions. Vascular health was affected. So if you look at the
that would be APOE. So you can see pathways on the side. I mean, COMT, GST, APOE. I saw there was a quinine reductase heterozygote as well. So you're expecting that it's going to push up those pathways.
Yes, so the first thing for me is really going back to cellular and really having to deal with detox. So just imagine if he didn't do this test, it might have not been the first place. We knew he had a brain tumor by his benign. We knew his mother had breast cancer, but there wasn't very much other cancer history. So it might have been something we thought about. But now this was really a very big priority to look at his detox pathway and starting with that, which is going to always affect his level of inflammation upstream. And then definitely dealing with methylation and oxidative stress for sure. So you had the oxidative stress, but a lot of the oxidative stress was around
being driven by the APOE and then some enos, PAI a little bit. Yeah, yes. All adding up a bit there.
Right, so this is the slide, which is exactly what we saw in his brain health. So these were the genes. So obviously if somebody's got an APOE 4E4, you're always going to go back to brain health and you're going to look at what are the other genes besides APOE that you are dealing with. And then you deal with all of those. You're going to deal with COMT, you're going to deal with his stress management, you're going to deal with methylation because of the MTRR, MTHFR. He's got the 1298, which is the lower impact gene. You're going to deal with enos, your nitric oxide saturase enzyme, which has got a slower function. So you're going to deal with repair of the vascular system. HL1, you're going to deal with his oxidative stress. NQ1, definitely phase 2 detox. OG1, DNA damage. So there you're going to again look at oxidative stress. And then your term 4 is brain health as well. So the other pathways that, and I've already shown you in the report, that you also now going to go back to would be detox, methylation, oxidative stress, hormone balance. So even though he's a male, we're still going to deal with hormone balance because he had a lot going on there in terms of the genes, and vascular health, because if you remember my previous slide where you look at other risks, so not just around risk for Alzheimer's, there's other risks as well that we have to, and he's already had a brain tumor. So we really want to deal with that. But it was interesting to me that he had a brain tumor and brain health came up so high. So I don't know the connection, but it's interesting that that's actually what happened to him. Right, so let's look at my recommendations. So first of all, if you remember the 3x4 guidelines, I'm going to rush through this a little bit. For brain health, what we want to do in terms of dietary guidelines, you want to avoid pro-inflammatory food, optimize fatty acid intake, ensure intake of anti-inflammatory food and your prebiotic food, so that's around gut health. So that will help you minimize inflammation, insulin resistance, and support gut health. So to support detox, you want to make sure you support the phase 2 detox through your diet. You want to reduce oxidative stress. Remember, he wasn't eating a lot of vegetables, so that will help reduce inflammation risk, obviously help with brain health, and also we still want to worry about cancer risk anyway. And then also support his methylation through diet, which will have remember he's also suffering from depression. So we also want to address that.
That COMT is causing a little bit of havoc as well.
Yeah. Then in terms of his lifestyle recommendations, he was actually over-exercising. So he did have, I didn't show the rest of the report, he did have a really high-powered endurance ability genetically. And that's also why he was enduring. His recovery and his injury risk was medium. So we will still work around that, but I still wanted him to...
But with ultra-endurance participation for 20 to 30 years, the oxidative stress load in someone who we definitely don't want such a house is definitely not been a great... I mean, that's a long time to be doing ultra-endurance.
Yeah.
That's when exercise is not in the sweet spot.
Yeah. We want to address his circadian rhythms, and also obviously around that he'll increase his BDNF and support detox. We'll enhance we were talking about fasting and definitely his stress management. So this really motivated him to look at his stress. In terms of nutraceuticals, there's a really long list. We're obviously not going to give him everything on this list. So these were just some examples. So we want to support mitochondrial health. We want to support detoxification, methylation as well. We want to support his brain health, obviously looking at his zinc-copper ratio, his fatty acid intake, and then phosphatidylserine is quite a lot. And then hopefully Craig and Julie will help us with that. And then reducing inflammation. The SPM active resolvents are really important for if there's some acute inflammation. Testing, these are blood tests. We'll test his homocysteine, his B12, vitamin D is very important. we can look at stress. If we're worried about it, we can test that. We can look at his insulin, his fasting insulin, HbA1c, hormone balances, lipograms, and also copper zinc ratio.
We might want to do heavy metal.
Yeah, heavy metal
test as well. Yeah.
Heavy metal,
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to do that. Okay, and then definitely I did strongly advise.
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about earlier around the E4 genetic counseling conversation. So I knew there was a slide.
Yes.
It was just a little further on.
All right, and then this is
me.
Somebody here next to me who's actually got quite a rare report. I was saying to her, I was looking for other reports because I've done so many that's similar and it's actually quite rare. But Yael Joffe has got an E4 as well, and this was something that she always tells us that she had an E4 and MTHFR, and that was always your story.
Yeah, so that was my story. So obviously I've been testing myself for a very long time. And the first thing that I came up with is that I had an APOE 3/4 and I had a MTHFR 677TT, and I have a very, as I mentioned, strong family history of Alzheimer's. And so for me, I've always kind of carried a story, you know, that Alzheimer's was my thing, and that if there was anything I was going to get early in life, it was going to be Alzheimer's. And I carried this like a very dark cloud over my head. The last thing I want is to lose contact. And I always said, you know, someone in my family, we've got 3 daughters, and I was always like, I wonder which one of us is going to be. Anyway, and of course, in my history of nutrition testing, I've always been focusing on single gene variant recommendations up until the last couple of years when I realized the error of my ways. And that, you know, we really need to look at this kind of polygenic environment of SNPs. And that's obviously how 3x4 came to be. And very importantly in brain health, because there are lots of different genes working in different pathways that will contribute to the development of an Alzheimer's or a cognitive decline or a dementia. So when I did my test, I was absolutely convinced I was going to see a purple in my brain health, because that's my story. And this is quite unique in that even and I do have APOE 3/4 and I do have MTHFR-TT, but if you look at my cellular pathways, they're actually, I have a fabulous report that they're all on medium and nothing's coming up as purple. Not my MTHFR, so not methylation, not detox, and definitely not brain health. So it was a real awakening for me that this one gene, E34, does not determine or drive by itself. It doesn't matter if it's medium penetrance. It doesn't matter if there's the 7 times more likely chance of Alzheimer's. The fact is, it still sits in the context of other genes that are involved in brain health. And brain health, of course, is determined not just by one pathway, but by methylation, detoxification, oxidative stress, inflammation. So this case study of myself is actually a really good alternative to looking at the case study before, that, you know, APOE is a really important gene to know, but by itself, it does not define Alzheimer's risk. And I really wanted that to be the kind of end point that I hope that you got out of today, that we want to know. It's incredibly informative. There's a great deal that we can do, but by itself, it doesn't define a particular risk for a disease. And so that's why I wanted to pop my fabulous results in there. Okay.
She's just bragging.
I'm bragging. Let's keep it moving because I want to see any questions.
Okay, so that's really that's brain
me.
health for her. And the reason why it was medium is because even though she's got those, there was not much around other inflammation and other genes as well. So I think one of your parents you chose well.
Yeah, I know which one, because I know which side the Alzheimer's came from. So luckily my mother's family did a better job.
So then in summary, what's important to remember is that it's affected by other factors besides APOE4. It's a medium penetrance gene variant, so you have to take it seriously, but there's a lot we can do. You have to consider other metabolic pathways, and that's why we don't recommend that you only test one gene. Your appropriate diet and lifestyle changes can reduce your risk and even reverse some of the symptoms, and there's quite a lot of case studies like that. And then the last thing is that it's really been shown to improve motivation for lifestyle changes.
So saying there's quite a lot of research in the literature that shows that people who chose to have their APOE tested and got the result were more likely to make positive changes in terms of exercise, supplements, diet, removing refined carbohydrates, sugar from the diet, than if they didn't know their APOE. So, you know, we firmly believe that as long as you've assessed your patient well enough, especially the emotional side, that it's always better to have this knowledge than not to have this knowledge. And it goes back to our initial teaching is we don't know what we don't know. And when we know, we can take action. Okay, we're going to jump onto some questions. I'm going to have a look what we've got here. Amazing. Okay. Just go more, see if there's any more questions. We're just checking if there are any questions. Oh, sorry. Right, we can't find any questions here. So what, when you pushed more, there was nothing. So are we going to assume that no one's got questions? You can post them on a network group. If not, then what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to Craig, Dr. Craig Golding, because Craig is ready for us. And if you come up with any questions while we're talking to Craig or because of Craig, or you want to ask Craig, then post them with absolute pleasure. So I'm going to move into the driving seat. Oh, yes. Okay. So Emma's just mentioned about gluten. Thanks, Emma. We are going to deal with the gluten question again, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to throw it at Craig, and I'm going to throw it at Julie as well.
Bye.
Put them on the. And the other thing was we have a question, which again, we have Craig online now. I'm going to unmute. Oh, Craig, you're unmuted.
Thank you, Yale.
Oh, excellent. There he is. So welcome, Craig. Lovely to have you. Thanks for making time. I know you have a lot of patients who want your time.
My pleasure.
I think you heard a little bit about what the conversation was that was going on before. So I am going to take advantage of having you with us today. And before we get to talk about your course, your upcoming course, which is why I invited you, I want to throw two questions at you that have come through because you're perfectly qualified for it. The first one is, how do you do heavy metal testing? What is your test of choice?
Well, there's a number of tests one can do. So I have an oligoscan so that I can have an immediate result. So I use the oligoscan where you check on the hand 4 spots so that you can check heavy metals and also mineral status. So you can check nutrient depletions as well as toxicities. Now we know with memory decline, for example, and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, neurodegenerative problems, generally we see metals like aluminium and mercury. So I can get it quickly done with an oligoscan. I also do something called hair tissue mineral analysis. You cut a snip of hair close to the scalp, not the end of the hair, close to the scalp. And you can send it away and you get a metal and mineral analysis that way. You can also do it on what we call provocation testing. So you give a chelating agent like DMSA or DMPS by mouth or intravenously. And then you collect 6 to 12 hours urine. Normally 6 is enough. So I normally give DMSA 10 milligrams per kilogram. Then I wait 2 hours for absorption of the DMSA. So that's quick and easy to do orally. And then we collect a 6-hour urine and we send it off to our local labs and we get a heavy metal analysis. So there's various ways of doing it. You can also do it on blood. So you can do a test called ELISA. ELISA will tell you the metals in the blood at that time. So it's a specific test. It doesn't tell you chronic toxicities. It tells you kind of what you're acutely toxic in. So you can use
acute toxicity.
Acute, yeah. So let's say you're toxic in lead. You can ask for an ELISA lead on blood, and it will tell you what you're acutely toxic in. So I find the urine, saliva, and blood testing very useful. But I also found the oligoscan very useful so that I can get an immediate result, like in 5 to 10 minutes. So the more sophisticated the test, let's say you do a hair tissue mineral analysis or a urine analysis, it takes a while to get the results back. But we have them all available. You know, you can do urine tests, saliva tests, hair or urine tests.
Urine tests, yeah.
And then you can get the metals. It's critical to get the metals when you're wanting to prevent Alzheimer's, especially, as I say, aluminium and mercury. I mean, we know in Alzheimer's you have these neurofibrillary tangles, and at the core of that is aluminium. And mercury patterning, mercury damage to the brain looks much the same. So I normally say, like, there's a triangle here, from your mouth to your brain, and from your mouth to your heart. So inflammation in the mouth, for example, with mercury fillings, you know, and and inflammation in the mouth, like gingivitis, herpes simplex, things like that around the mouth area, cause inflammation. And systemic inflammation is one of the causes of dementia. And same with heart. Chronic inflammation causes heart disease. Inflammation and oxidative stress, as you've highlighted. So it's very important to take care of your mouth as well, because metals sometimes are from the mouth, particularly mercury.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So I like to say also, with Alzheimer's in particular, and chronic complex diseases like autoimmune diseases, cancer, dementia, these kinds of multi-system diseases are best approached with functional integrated medicine, because you can't just use one drug, for example, to reverse a cancer or an autoimmune disease or a dementia. It's a multi-system disease, so you need a multi-system approach. For example, looking at the gut, the adrenals, your diet, looking at toxicity, high sugar, obesity, looking at hormone levels and trophic support to the brain. So it's multi-system. And also, Dale Bredesen wrote a lovely book called End of Alzheimer's.
Yes, we had it in one of our slides, I think, before you came on. Yeah.
So he says, and I so agree with him, 20th century medicine is what you have. For example, you have Alzheimer's. 21st century medicine is why you have this problem.
Yeah.
So when you know the cause of the Alzheimer's, let's say it's inflammation or glycotoxicity or hormone decline or loss of trophic support to the brain or heavy metal toxicity, or gut issues, leaky gut, leaky brain, aluminium goes through Alzheimer's. So when you address the cause and you know how to test for the cause, then you know the why of the Alzheimer's. And obviously, Gail, you know all too well as our experts, bless you, as our experts in gene therapies. Genes are so important. Your methylation genes, your glutathione SNPs, your APOE gene, for example. There's many, many genes. So it's very important to look at the lifestyle, how the person's exercising, what are they eating, are they active, are they, for example, dancing and gardening and doing wonderful things, because you need to stay active, you need to keep moving.
Yeah.
But one also wants to look at the food and what you're eating, as has been highlighted from what I was listening to you guys this morning. Spot on. Food is so important. I mean, even if I said, food is your medicine. Food is thy medicine. So food is very important. And so are the metals. And so is inflammation. And so is vitamin D. And so is curcumin. And so is omega-3. And so is olive oil. Lisa Mosconi wrote a lovely book called Brain Food. And she highlights, for example, even that Indian spices like curcumin and so on. Very important to
Yeah.
Sorry for babbling away. I just wanted to highlight.
No, look, you can go for hours, so I'm going to have to control you. But it's wonderful. Yeah.
Gluten and casein.
Yeah. Tell me about gluten, because
the problem with gluten is it can cause a leaky gut. And sometimes, our wheat these days, sometimes GMO'd and so on. So it's not just the gluten, it's the GMO and pesticides and so on.
glyphosates.
Yeah, glyphosates. And then what one gets is a leaky gut or a hyperpermeable gut, as the gastroenterologists like to call it. Leaky gut, that's a functional term.
Yeah.
But it's what it is, the leaky gut. Yeah. When you have a leaky gut, you're very susceptible to what we call a leaky blood-brain barrier.
Correct.
And when you have a leaky blood-brain barrier from gluten or casein induced from dairy, or inflammation, or metals like aluminium, in particular, from like over-vaccination, there's a lot of aluminium that can cause a leaky gut brain barrier. And this can actually increase your risk for like autism spectrum problems, ADHD in kids, attention deficit, autism spectrum, allergies, asthma, and then, in adults in particular, dementia. So this is a preventable disease, as Dale Bredesen also says. Alzheimer's is largely a preventable disease. You don't have to wait to get it. If you look at it as a multi-system problem, including the genes, including inflammation, glycotoxicity from too much sugar, diabetes. We know about diabetes 3, it's basically insulin resistance and obesity. Yeah. So you've got to look at all the systems, the hormones, the trophic support of the brain. I heard a lovely nutrient there in the Nutraceuticals, phosphatidylserine. I love that because phosphatidylserine lowers your cortisol, but it also improves memory and trophic support, to the brain. And then you've got lion's mane mushroom, wonderful for these nerve growth factors, brain-derived neurotrophic factors. This is the trophic support to the brain. So you've got to look after everything. As Dale Bredesen says, it's not one hole in the roof. It's 36 holes in the roof.
36 holes in the roof.
Yes. And that's what you've got to address, all of those factors, if you want to prevent and treat Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And only 1 or 2 of those might be pharmaceutical.
Right. So an acetylcholine esterase, for example, inhibitor, like Aricept, that's one hole in.
One hole in the roof, yeah.
There's a lot of other holes. 35 is actually more, much more. And then, 36 holes Dale refers to. But I also like to include light for mitochondrial medicine. So we have like a device, a transcranial light device, where we shine infrared light into the brain. And this is a novel therapy to energize the brain, but also to help reverse dementia and even Parkinson's. So we call it transcranial. We put it like a halo little plastic device around the head, and we connect it to a laser device. And then you can actually shine light into the brain. It's incredible. And you can use oxygen therapies, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
A lot of that happening, yeah.
Music, Yale, interestingly, music cannot be forgotten. But the trick with the music is you need to listen to the music that you enjoyed when you were younger. So let's say you're 71, like my mom is 71 at the moment. So I'm making her listen to Elvis at the moment because she's had a little bit of memory decline because she loved Elvis Presley and still does. So music is very beneficial to the brain. And the genes, using nutraceuticals like, sulforaphane and NAC for glutathione and methylation support. All of these, when you get the SNPs through the 3x4 gene testing, then you know what nutraceuticals and food adjustments mean,
So I went to a very interesting talk at Exponential Medicine last year, where there's a company in the US who are targeting cognitive decline through music. And exactly what you just said, that what they've realized is that music that connects, and not all music connects, has the ability to activate the brain and restore cognitive function. And they've said
it must connect with the person.
Connect with the person. And they said that the music we listen to as teenagers is the music that we connect with most. So exactly what you're saying. So basically, you as a practitioner would order from this company, you would tell them who the person was, where they lived, and what age they were, and they would create a playlist that would connect with what was the music that was happening when they were, apparently when you're a teenager is when your brain is most susceptible, most connected to music. And they create playlists for patients to try reconnect on music. And they formed an entire company around connection.
I absolutely love that because that's part of the therapy, It's not just about how many pills you swallow. It's the lifestyle, the exercise, the music, even gardening, and a little bit of sunlight for the vitamin D, you need curcumin, vitamin D, all of these things.
And exercise.
And it's wonderful that people are embracing music and even dancing,
that you could do too, together. Dancing is exercise. Dancing is exercise, and as long as you're dancing to something that you listened to when you were a teenager, fantastic. Anyway, thank you, Craig. That's exactly what I wanted to hear from you. Okay, we have a question.
I'm going to get off to my next patient. Is that okay with you?
Sorry?
I have another patient at 10:30, so I'm going to...
don't worry. I'm watching the time very, very closely.
You still want me to be with you till about 10:30?
We will be done by 10:30. Is that right? Stay with us, because I have a question for you. I will make sure that you will be done by 10:30 for your patient. One of our practitioners, Marissa, wants to know a little bit more about trophic support for BDNF. You mentioned something around a mushroom, and then they didn't hear any more. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, look, I'm doing this cognitive decline course coming up pretty soon, but I do look at the trophic support in quite detail during this course. But we look at things like lion's mane mushroom, LION, lion's mane. It's called lion's mane mushroom. It gives you nerve growth factor support. And also we have herbal adaptogens like ashwagandha that we use for the adrenals. It also lends trophic support to the brain. So do hormones like pregnenolone, for example, and DHA. They help with trophic support of the brain. So pregnenolone I like to include in my hormone replenishments, particularly in the dementia patients. The pregnenolone and DHA is very useful. And then phosphatidylserine is really, really useful because it helps lower the cortisol. And often with cognitive decline and a bit of memory lapses, people get very anxious and uneasy about that. So it's important to look after the adrenals at the same time. So we use ashwagandha. Ashwagandha helps with the adrenals and the brain, trophic support, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And then the nerve growth factor, I use lion's mane. So I use ashwagandha, phosphatidylserine, lion's mane, hormones like pregnenolone. These all help the trophic support. And it's very important to look at the trophic support because, us doctors, we get trained in neurology, for example, as physicians. And then you focus on the nerve function, So you focus on the nerve and not the insulation or the trophic support of the nerve. And the trophic support of the nerve is nerve growth factor and brain-derived neurotrophic factors. So if you're looking, for example, and there's more of that, the trophic support than there are nerves.
Yeah.
So when you're looking, if you want to look at it, how I explain it to my patients is look at an electric cable. It's got insulation around it. The white around the electrical cable, the copper cable, whatever the cable it is. That myelin sheath and the trophic support around that, I try and explain to them is like the trophic support of the electric cable, the neuron. So the trophic support is critical. And the hormones, the ashwagandha, the phosphatidylserine, the lion's mane, these are all very, very...
What about berberine?
Berberine I love as well. I consider berberine a neurotropic, actually. It helps improve memory. But what's so beautiful about berberine, curcumin we know is our number one kind of anti-inflammatory go-to.
Yeah.
Berberine is my favorite kind of metabolic go-to. So berberine helps with insulin resistance. It helps with dyslipidemia. So let's say you have a fatty liver. It helps a lot with that. It helps with weight loss. And not only does it help with insulin resistance and diabetes, it's my number one nutraceutical for diabetes, is berberine. And diabetes, is related to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's dementia later. So what I do is I get berberine in the mix as soon as possible because it helps with insulin resistance, helps with fatty liver, it helps with dyslipidemia, it helps with inflammation. And the important thing that people don't know, some people don't know, Dr. Toman wrote a wonderful book on neurotropics. I'm not sure if he's a doctor, but his name is Toman. Anyway, he also says berberine, one of his favorite neurotropics, which means it improves memory. What a delight, to have better control of your blood sugar and insulin, as well as your lipids, and at the same time have improved memory. I think it's a beautiful nutraceutical. I absolutely love berberine. I take it myself.
Okay, well, I might be ordering mine this afternoon. Sounds like a go-to supplement. Why don't you? Thank you for that. That was all great, and I just know that everyone's sitting there listening and going, "This is fantastic. We want more Craig." So let's tell them how to get more Craig. Tell us about. I heard about your course through yourself, but I also heard about it through. Lorraine, with regards to functional medicine South Africa, which we're starting to hear about again. And we know that the Dale Bresden course is available, but it's overseas, it's in the US, it's in dollars, has some challenges to it. Yeah. And so I'm super excited to, and Julie will tell us a little bit because she's done the Dale Bresden course, but let's hear about amazing, sorry?
I did the Dale Bredesen course
last year. You did it as well, yeah. I'm sure. So tell us a little bit about the course. Tell us what will be in it, how it will work, when it will be. Give us some information because I'm sure everyone's sitting here going, how do I know what he knows?
All right. First of all, as I said earlier, it's a Alzheimer's and cognitive decline is a multi-system disease. And 21st century medicine is looking at the cause, the why you have it. So the cognitive series that we're putting together with Functional Medicine South Africa and Lorraine, I've prepared the webinars. We're going to do it over a period of time, July, August-ish, with webinars online. So you can actually do webinar by webinar at your own pace. And then after we finish the webinars, currently there's about 11 or 12 of the webinars. I've already prepared them, but we're going to divide them and split them up a little bit so there's not information overload, per webinar.
Yeah.
So the webinar idea is to address, for example, the causes. So we know inflammation is a cause. We know glycotoxicity is a cause. Hormone decline, trophic support loss is a cause of Alzheimer's. But also there's a new concept of something called inhalational dementia. Inhalational mold, for example, can cause cognitive decline.
Oh, right.
So I address the causes, even things like herpes simplex and MARCoMS and Candida and Helicobacter pylori, gut issues, gut-brain connection, inflammation in the gut causes inflammation in the brain. So I address all the causes, including the metals that we mentioned earlier. So I address all the causes, and then, a systemic approach as to how to test, for example, the genes, I learned a lot from you, Yale, over the years.
Hope they're in the course. Hope they're in the course, Craig.
It's in the course. It's
Yay,
quite a massive webinar where I discuss all the genes that you've already highlighted in this webinar today. Discuss all the genes involved with memory decline and cognitive decline, and then we address them. Much like you've highlighted today, all the ones that are specifically pertinent to memory. I highlight all of those, also those that are particularly relevant to metabolic syndrome, to detoxification, inflammation, oxidative stress, all the things that I highlighted. So we go into the genes, and then we go into the inhalational dementia, the mold, and how you test that, how you check for innate immunity testing, complement split molecules, how you check for heavy metals, how you check for organic acids, for example. Organic acids are very important for neurotransmitter testing in the urine, but also for mitochondrial function, Krebs cycle function, B vitamins, carnitine, amino acids. Also, amino acids and organic acid testing is now available in this country. So we do those tests when necessary. In the RECODE program with Dale in the US, it's a lot of tests, and I have tabulated them, but it's very, very expensive. Yeah. So what I like to do is to discuss the budget, if I can call it that, with the patient, because not everyone can afford it. All those tests and all the supplements becomes very, very expensive. So I like to discuss it with the patient and a lifestyle coach and a nutritionist, people who can help as a team to manage the patient, because if you just give them like a lab form with 20,000 rands blood tests and 20,000 rand supplements, you've lost the patient. So for me, it's like practical. How are you going to manage this patient? How are you going to test the patient? How are you going to encourage them to eat correctly, etc., etc. So the course is split up to cover all of those aspects. And then after the webinars, what we're going to do is have a workshop, most likely in Joburg, Cape Town, the KZN area, somewhere in Schlongerish, where I joined you for a wonderful, wonderful talk once. So the workshop idea will be done only after the webinars. So in my mind, it's like give everyone the theory through the webinars, and then the workshop after is like a 4 to 5 hour literally workshop. It's like, here's the kind of lab test, here's the kind of function.
Case study based.
Because in medicine, as a physician, the way I learned, and we were trained, even postgraduate, you learn the theory and then you learn the practical. So the workshop kind of idea that I have with Lorraine and Functional Medicine South Africa is to have a workshop after where we can say, right, these are the kinds of genes you can do, let's say with Yale, or these are the kinds of organic acid testing, functional lab tests you can do at XYZ, no specific person, right? And then the kinds of supplements you can take. Nothing specific, but obviously ketosis, for example, and keto foods, keto diet plans, keto sticks testing with precision meters and so on, will show you exactly how to check someone's ketones. And then obviously there's a lot of keto supplements that one can use, like MCT oils and so on. So with diet and ketosis and correct supplements and correct lifestyle change, and with the lifestyle coach, and which I encourage, the lifestyle coach, and then and genetic testing with nutritionists who know what they're doing with the supplements and then you can manage the patient so much better. The standard 20th century way of managing Alzheimer's is like just give the patient Aricept, and on you go, off you go. It's a multi-system problem, and you need to address all of these problems, and then as a team, manage the patient much more effectively. As Dale himself says, and I'm repeating myself here, Alzheimer's is largely a preventable disease. We don't have to get it. And when we get it, there's 7 stages of it. The first 6 stages you can largely get.
You can still treat.
Yes, you can still treat it. It's not that everyone needs to wait for Alzheimer's and go to an old age home. What I always say, when you want to live a longer life, and we know now that more people are going to live to 80, 100 plus, 120 plus. When you want to live to a longer life, you want to have your vision intact, your mobility intact, your memory intact, and the absence of disease. No autoimmune disease, no cancer, no dementia. That's the ideal. You want to be mobile, see, think properly, have your memory, all your faculties about you, without disease. So that's our goal with life extension. What's the point of living to 100 if you're not mobile and you can't remember anything, and you can't see anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's kind of my goal, is vision, mobility, memory, absence of disease.
Sounds
So the
good.
webinar series and the workshop, the cognitive decline series with Functional Medicine South Africa, I put it together last year and early part of this year already. So we're ready to go. Functional Medicine South Africa, Lorraine.
Sounds like it's fairly soon, right? So
Lorraine and Taryn at the moment are just busy touching up the webinars.
okay.
The content is already done. So honestly, I mean, I put it together with Lorraine, but
Yeah.
the content myself, and
Yeah.
I must say I'm quite impressed with the course because it covers the multi-system approach, and Yale, the functional medicine, integrative medicine is so suited to these kinds of complex diseases. Conventional medicine, and I am a conventional physician as well, but conventional medicine is more suited to acute conditions. You know, like if you break your arm, go to the surgeon. If you have a pneumonia, maybe see the physician. If you have a heart attack, maybe go to the coronary care unit. But maybe you should, if you have a heart attack, go to the coronary care unit.
Don't go to you.
Vitamin C under a tree. But for chronic complex diseases, like dementia, you need integrated medicine. That's the only way that you stand a chance of preventing and treating it.
So Craig, sounds fantastic. It sounds like it's pretty soon. So if anyone's listening to this webinar and they want to do the course, who do they contact? Because it sounds like it's happening in the next month. And
the next month or two. So, they must contact Lorraine and Functional Medicine South Africa directly.
Okay.
So they do have a Facebook page. I've asked that they contact Lorraine directly because she's coordinating.
Sure. Okay.
And you know, my diary is so full, I mean, I saw a patient quickly before seeing you now, and I have another one at 10.
Jumping onto another one.
Jumping on a plane on Friday to Germany to talk mitochondrial stuff. So, you know, I'd rather Lorraine coordinate.
No, definitely. No, you're not managing it from. That's why I want to know. So we will. I mean, most people should know how to get hold of Lorraine because she's admin pro. But if you don't, let us know, and we will give you a direct number to get hold of her. And really, I mean, this is an amazing opportunity to really get on top of cognitive health. So I hope everyone who's listening will look to attend this because I think it's really quite a unique opportunity for us.
Thanks, Yael. Just one thing whilst we're talking there.
Yeah.
People always ask like cost, you know, what is this going to cost?
Yes,
so,
cost.
So I was speaking to Lorraine a week or two ago. We decided around 8,500 for the whole course, including the workshop at the end of the
workshops.
Which is really not bad. You know, when I did Dale's course, which is a lovely one, it just doesn't have enough of the, you know, the transcranial light and the mitochondrial stuff. The nutraceuticals are there, but I've just expanded a little bit and made it like in the South African context. What kind of infections do we see here?
And what can afford, what South African patients can afford and not.
This is where we live. You know, this is where we practice medicine and functional integrated medicine. We cater for our clients here in South Africa. They're not US citizens, they're South African citizens.
Yeah.
So we were looking at about 8,500. I mean,
that will include the workshop as well. So it's everything.
Yeah. I paid about 4 times that for Dale's course online in the US. So it's really not a lot. If you consider that you get all the gene advice, a lot of which I learned from you, Yael, about the genes. And then also all the lab testing, the supplement advice, the lifestyle advice, the detox advice, the metals, the chelation. I cover everything, including mitochondrial health. Mitochondria is very important. And laser therapies and the workshop. So, I mean, I think it's a reasonable price for all that information.
Yeah, look, you can't do any courses in the US at that price, I can tell you. Not even, I mean,
all my courses in the US.
$500, which is probably one webinar in the US. So
I did my master's at University of South Florida, medical sciences. I mean, to travel to and fro over the years, it cost me more than R1 million, you know, to get
I tried that one until I realized it was unaffordable. Yeah,
it's crazy expensive.
We know from the courses that we can do that I mean, functional medicine in particular, the IFM courses are just, you know, unaffordable in rand. So
they're amazingly good, but they're just very
they're great, but we live in rands. So I think that sounds incredibly reasonable. So thank you for that. And I'm going to let you go now to move on to your next patient. And any queries I have on the course will forward to Lorraine. That's great. And yeah,
Is there anything particularly needing my input? You can email me directly. You have my email. So does Lorraine.
You've got all those hours of staying to Germany to respond to me. No, fantastic. Thanks so much, Craig. Thanks for taking the time out today to join us. We definitely have really valuable information, and I think there must be quite a few people out there very excited about the idea of doing the course. So I really appreciate it.
That too, and also, Yael, I think it gives Alzheimer's dementia families and Alzheimer's dementia patients hope. You know, that we have a multi-system approach to this.
Absolutely. That it's not a case of get your affairs in order and go home and wait for the old age home, which is pretty much what medicine is offering.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Craig. Have a great day, and thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Change over to Julie now. Okay, we're going to, hope you enjoyed that. It's always amazing talking to Craig, and he has such an incredible wealth of knowledge that I think we are then it's like days talking to Craig about what he knows and what I don't know. We are going to Dr. Julie at we'll just wait for Jules to get there. I think we're a little bit ahead of time, but I hope you don't mind, Jules. We're going to start 10 minutes early with you.
That's fine, because I've also got patients, so cool. That'll be great. Thanks, yeah.
A waiting room full of patients waiting outside. So thank you, Julie, for joining us. I'm sure many people have heard you speak on the other webinar, on the brain webinar that we did, or if they're in Cape Town, they've heard you in person. They're lucky to hear you in person. I've known Julie for a very long time, both as a GP, seeing her as a GP, and then as time passed on in functional medicine. And I've kind of watched Julie over the last 5 years truly evolve from a traditional GP to a fully fledged, running, practicing functional medicine practitioner, and it's been an amazing thing to be around, see, and Julie is one of our absolute Manuka quintessential nerds who made notes throughout the Manuka course and made sure she understood every single biochemical pathway. Truly one of our best students, and her I think she got absolutely 100%. In fact, I think she got 105% or something obscene like that for her Manuka assignment, which, as you know, doesn't really happen. So I actually asked Julie to join us today, not because I'm going to ask her to tell you about APOE. She's done that before, and Annalie's done a great job today. But really to join us about this journey. You know, we all start off as traditional dietitians or traditional MDs, and we find that there's a lot more to what we can do and who we can become in this space. And so I've actually asked Julie for 2 reasons. One is because she's been on this incredible journey, which I wanted her to share with us. And the other reason is because her journey has led her into cognitive health. So it was very pertinent for today. So I have sent Julie some questions, and I'm going to try not throw too much at her like I did at Craig. But, and I think Craig's already answered some really good questions for us. So I really want this to be about Julie and her journey rather than about gluten and berberine. I think we got some really good answers of that. So Jules, welcome.
Thank you so much. I just have to say, if there's a bit of noise initially, we are a little behind on our renovations at the practice and the angle grinders are going, but I have asked them to stop for half an hour. So I'm hoping that we won't have too many interruptions, but thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. We actually have a similar thing going on in our building. So we've got standby that if they start drilling, that they run upstairs and grab the drill. So we totally understand. That's absolutely right, Jules. So let's start with the first question is what I want to start with is just, you were obviously a GP and you had, what was it in you that made you look for something in medicine that you weren't getting working as a acute medicine GP?
You know, I guess I reached a point where I was getting so frustrated with the scope of my work and how I'd been trained in Western medicine. And I mean, patients would come in, I'd investigate them within my framework. We'd send them to specialists. They'd get some invasive investigations and come out with it. And they were absolutely fine. We couldn't find anything wrong. And I found that incredibly frustrating and knew that there had to be other answers out there, but I really didn't know kind of where to find them or what they were. And I reached the point where I knew that this wasn't the kind of medicine I wanted to practice for the next 30 to 40 years. I would really struggle to stay in medicine and stay as passionate as I am about my job if this was the kind of medicine I was going to practice. And so I was kind of stuck in a space of not knowing where to go and how I was going to change it.
I think you probably reflect a lot of the feelings that I know that many GPs that I've spoken to and just don't know how to do things differently. So how did you find, I mean, we know that you found your way into functional medicine, but how did that actually happen?
So I started doing an integrative medicine course through the University of Stellenbosch. They ran a couple of years, ran a couple of courses through Dr. Maria Christodoulou. And it was there that she mentioned, actually, I'd really just enrolled, was sort of 3 weeks into it. Actually, at the opening day, she told us about this AFMCP course and about functional medicine. And I just thought, wow, that sounds interesting. And then I remember Leora came to visit me and told me about the course. And I just thought, actually, I'm just going to go for it. This is crazy, but I'm going to go for it. And so I attended that AFMCP course in Cape Town. And I realized that was kind of my wow moment of, wow, this is what I've been missing out on. This is really what I need to be hearing about, learning about. And this was really how I was going to maintain my passion for medicine and how I would see myself working till I, well, not quite till I drop, but, you know, into my latter years. And that I could still have that passion, that there was so much more to learn and so much more to know. And that was really the beginning. And yeah, that's how I was introduced.
So the great story is, at the time I was seeing Julie as my GP because I lived in Sea Point and Julie's practice was nearby, and I do AMCP, which was being held at the Mount Nelson. They always hold these things in really nice places, and I was walking around saying hi to everyone, and I was like, what are you doing here? Like, I was absolutely shocked to see Julie there. And she was like, and in fact, I think I was there on the last day, so you'd already been through, and you were just like, this has been the best thing that I've ever done. You were like just raving about how fundamentally AMCP had completely shifted your understanding of medicine. I think I caught you at the end, and it was just the most beautiful thing to see that you had really, really like just embraced it. And I remember we were standing in the garden, we were having this beautiful lunch, really beautiful lunch, and you were just like, this is it, this is my thing, this is, you know, where I've arrived. And for those of you that don't know, AMCP is like the foundational course for functional medicine. And it used to be that you could only do it in America. Then they offered it in a few places around the world, one of which was Cape Town. But actually, recently, they now offer AMCP online. Quite recently, I think in the last 6 months or so.
I see that, yeah.
Functional medicine, again, you land up paying quite a dollar-based thing, but it really is an extraordinary foundational course in functional medicine. It's really a serious option. Okay, Jules, back to you. What has been the most rewarding part of your work in functional medicine? I mean, you've been doing it now for 5 years, not all the time. So, I mean, just tell us a little bit how you set yourself up, because I know that you have maintained both actual 1 foot in GP and 1 foot in functional medicine. And then tell us a little bit about what has been the most rewarding thing about having that functional medicine side to your work.
I think the most rewarding, I think, is to be able to have the knowledge and to have to be able to offer patients something more than I could offer them before, and really, and what I realized is that it brought me into the sort of the other parts of medicine that we neglect in my training, and in a busy GP consult, you've really got a very short time, and you need to get to kind of what's happening in the here and the now, deal with it, and move on. There's not a lot of scope to look at what's happening in the rest of the patient's life. So looking at this personalized approach, and I think the first thing that struck me when I did that course was the tree, that beautiful tree that shows where the roots come in and the root causes, and how that then we manifest with disease. And for me, that was kind of a wow, that really just shows us where we're just looking at the top, we're looking at what's on top of the tree with all the illnesses, and being able to share that information with patients, that we were going to now look a bit deeper, and then also just introducing then into my history, taking all the other facts of always asking about sleep, asking about other stresses, asking about the other things on the matrix, asking about their hobbies and what they do to relax. Really checking about their exercise, how much are they doing, what kind of exercise are they doing, looking at their support structures, and taking quite a, well, not according to a nutritionist, but for me, quite a detailed nutritional history, just to see what are they doing. And what I realized with just doing that, adding that to my intake questions and first consult, I gained such a lot of extra information about patients that I could, when they were telling me about whatever was wrong, I already knew from their history that these are areas we've really got to focus on. And if I hadn't asked those questions, I really wouldn't have a clue. I would just treat them for whatever was coming today, and I don't think I would be offering them a very valuable service. The other thing is looking at the timeline and the importance of really a person's, from when they were born and even the pregnancy, how important that information is in working out what's actually happening today. So in my training, that really wasn't emphasized. So I felt like I'm offering a much more holistic picture and a much more holistic approach, really, to what my patients are coming in with. At the same time, I'm still have my Western medicine hat on. I'll never lose that. I think, when you're transitioning or trying to, when you're learning new things, and I find myself a lot in the beginning thinking, now which hat am I wearing? Oh my word, I can't just go Western medicine now. My go-to is just give some cortisone, but I can't do that. Oh my word, what now? So I found there was a lot of anxiety in the initial stages, but as I become more experienced and worked with different things, that's obviously settled. And then the other area was working with Anne Lenoy. That was very useful, because obviously having done your genetics course, which really was, I remember coming to you at a point as well where I'd done AFMCP, I'd done the integrative medicine courses, and I yet still found myself kind of, how do I sort of do this better, and what more can I do? And I came and met with you to ask you sort of, what should I do? I think I was looking at doing something through Functional Medicine University, or and what did you think? I know you know a lot of those people, and you just come up with your Manuka course, and you said, well, why don't you try that? So me, I love a course. I launched myself into that, and really learned such a lot through that, and gave me a lot of other nutritional information. And then obviously the genetics, which has been an important part, an important addition to everything else. And then with Anne's model, where we could then, already using what we'd learned from the functional medicine approach, adding the genetics in and adding that aspect in, and then looking sort of at the genetics, the epigenetics, and then everything that's happening downstream from that. So those, I've really felt those areas, and has really played a big role in and been important in how I've sort of grown. And while I've realized that I don't do nutrigenomics all the time, but having that as another tool, and being able to offer that and being able to use that information and interpret it is incredibly useful, and also adds a different aspect to what I'm offering my patients.
Jules, thanks, that's great. That gives us a really good sense of how you got to where you are. Now, what's happened more recently is you've actually shifted your functional work into cognitive. And are becoming almost a specialist in that space. So tell us a little bit about what happened. How did that happen? Why did it happen?
So I'm in Sea Point. My practice is in Sea Point, and there's a very large elderly population here. And I seem to, for whatever reason, I've had a connection with both old age homes in the area since I started. And so I've got quite a large elderly practice, and I became increasingly frustrated that I had patients come in, they were diagnosed with dementia, put onto medication, and then on they'd go, and I'd just do my little thing on the side. So I had my patients right on my doorstep and that I'm involved with, and a very big elderly population. And then also just younger people coming in their 50s saying, oh, I'm really worried about my memory, and I think things are happening. And I really didn't feel well equipped to deal with that and have a sort of a plan of how we could approach it. And so obviously, when I did the Manuka course and learning about the APOE4 gene, and that brought me onto reading Dale Bredesen's book. And when I read that book, I really thought, wow, now this is kind of the next thing that I really feel is something that I could really use and embrace and use and to the benefit of the patients, and to be able to offer something else to these patients, because largely they would go obviously to their geriatrician or psychogeriatrician or whoever's diagnosing them with dementia. They'd get their medicine and it would be, well, see you in 6 months, and that was it. I mean, I'm generalizing a little bit. They do advise some vitamins, but not a lot else happens around that. And so I really felt like this was an area that I could embrace and could see myself working in much more in the future and trying to niche myself into that area. So, I mean, I then went on and did Dale Bredesen's course last year, which was very interesting and has given me access then to if a patient starts on the protocol, I can then access that protocol and work with them around the protocol and sort of understanding that protocol. So that for me was quite a major driver in trying to understand more about cognitive decline and his approach and with his success. I think what I've realized is, and as you do with all these courses, they're fantastic and they offer a lot of information. But as Craig said, we are in the South African climate. We don't have just a whole, the lab tests are very expensive. Not everyone wants to know the genetics. So I've really had to work, adjust it and work with each patient as they come, where they're at, and try and affect some change with them at that point.
Jules, we know you did the Bresden one, but you told me that you, I think, have completed another course and are signed up for another course. Tell us about the other courses you chose that would have upskilled you in this space.
Yes. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Datus Karizian, who's an amazing educator, and he ran a course on neuroinflammation, which I had started doing some of his courses with Anne Lenoy. She had enrolled in his big sort of functional neurology course, but that was intense and just hectic. And this I felt was going to be a much more bite-sized, sort of manageable course. So I actually enrolled in that, and that's very, and recently completed the first part of that. There are going to be 3 parts, but what was really fascinating there was just looking further into brain cells and brain function and beyond the neurons, and that actually he looked at the neuroglial cells, which are 90% of the brain, and the neurons are actually sort of 10% of the brain. And he's looking at and these neuroglial cells play a major function in the brain. And he looks at how, looking at, again, diet, environment, nutritional aspects, lifestyle, all of these play a major factor in what happens, any damage potentially to these glial cells. And then that will then set up this neuroinflammatory pathway. And we know that cognitive decline is really a function of that neuroinflammation. So within this course, because Dale Bredeson's course is fantastic, and it offers us one aspect of dealing with this, but there are lots of other people out there with very good information, and so I'm trying to go more broader and look at what other information is out there, and so I will be doing his next one, which will be on gut brain, and then the third one is autoimmune and the brain. So all tying in a lot with what Craig was talking about. We have to look at all the factors, and I think that as he said, in chronic disease, what I realize, the more I study and the more I look at things, there's a lot of detail, but you have to stand back and go, right, if you're not eating right, sleeping right, exercising and managing your stress, then, and I remember one of the other clinicians also, I remember said, eating right, sleeping right, pooping right, managing your stress. So if you're not doing those basics, then, and exercising, you really, that is the core of what we need to get back to. And so that's, the more I study, the more I realize those core things are really what we need to look at. And when we look at even dietary, it's about what you're eating, what you're not eating, and then supplements. When we're looking about exercise, it's what we are exercising physically, but how are we exercising our brains? And then when we're looking at sleep, making sure that we have at least 7 to 8 hours sleep, not more than that, not less than that, so that our brains can do what they need to do at night while we're sleeping. And stress, how we're managing our stress and the impact that stress has on our brains. So I think, those are such critical fundamentals. And I think in this space, the nutritionists are really addressing those fantastically. So, I mean, I'm talking to a group of people that are already doing a lot of that.
Okay, great.
Could I mention yes, one other course that I've done actually, yes, that I feel is very useful, and specifically in the South African context. If you have patients with dementia, a wonderful woman, Alice Ashwell, runs a company called Dementia Connect, and she had a mom, her mom had Alzheimer's, and she actually has her PhD in education, and she then set about, after her journey with her mom, developed this course which is really around supporting family members who have family with dementia, and then also providing skills to the carers and about as to how to manage these patients. And she does an online, I'll share the details with everyone afterwards, because I think it's she's an invaluable resource for any patients or any families with patients with Alzheimer's. And in terms of, she'll set up just for the family around their issues and how to help them, and has amazing, so I've just done her course online so that I could know what she offers, and there's some amazing tools there that actually can be used across all, personally and with patients with Alzheimer's or dementia. So she's really fantastic.
That sounds great. I mean, I'll get all the details from you and I'll post it onto our network groups so that everyone can get it. Because what I love is that you're coming at it from all directions. That you're not, you're doing the neuroinflammation, kind of very academic, kind of biochemical stuff. You're doing the Bredesen stuff. You're doing the counseling. So for me, that's doing Manuka. You got the genes. So it really is the way of becoming an expert. Jules, maybe just to finish off. Case study you can share with us where you've been able to really have an impact and use this amazing knowledge that you're acquiring to really reverse or prevent or manage a patient that you can tell us about? Preferably one that but
Pardon? Preferably one that did the genetics.
That had genetics in, but
I know. Unfortunately, this patient didn't have his genetics in, and he's but a 75-year-old gentleman who had a history of prostate cancer and had received radiotherapy for that previously. But his main things were really his hypercholesterolemia and hypertension. And when he came to me, he'd been to the neurologists and seen psychologists, and in fact, and they just said, okay, well, here's your medication, and we'll see you in 6 months. So his daughter's actually a patient of mine, and so he came to see me. And when I looked through his history, obviously having done the Dale Bredesen course and looking at all the possible factors, I always try and put them into sort of a type, even if I don't have the genetics. And looking at his diet and lifestyle, didn't exercise much, really ate a lot of sugar, did a lot of sweets, and not enough of the good things, not enough phytonutrients in his diet. Interestingly, when you ask people, always got to ask them, when you ask them how much they drink, and they said not very much. And I remember saying, oh, really? And how much is that? 24 beers a week. For a 75-year-old man, I thought that was pretty impressive.
Wow.
That he thought that wasn't a lot. Anyway, and very high functioning, a top businessman. And he assured me that his friends drank a whole lot more than him. And so just really going through his diet with him, I really did the very basics with him, because he was insistent he didn't want to do the genetics, and actually at the beginning said to me that he actually thinks he's lived a good life. 75, he's had a great life. If he goes anytime soon, that's fine. He's fine with it. But I've been working with him for 6 months now, and changing the effects in the diet. At that time, his MOCA score, which is a way we do assessments just to get a baseline. It's the Montreal Cognitive Assessment tool, and he scored 23 out of 30. So that put him in sort of mild cognitive decline, and it wasn't impacting his function. He could still function totally independently. But so changing the diet, changing his lifestyle, exercising, starting him doing some brain exercises. He actually in 3 months improved his MOCA from 23 to 26 out of 30. Wow. Now, I think the important thing is at that point, he wasn't that aware that there'd been a change. So that's why it's always important to have a baseline of when you're starting. But when I spoke to his family, they just the comments about how he's just, and I actually realized when he was with me, initially he talked a lot around a point, and which is typical with patients with dementia. They especially when they're still quite highly functioning, they can really, if you didn't know that they had dementia, you might not realize it, because they can kind of talk around something and really compensate. And I found he did that a lot less. I'd ask him questions, he directly answered me. He was a lot sharper on the time he took to doing pattern recognition and doing the test. And when I spoke to the family, they just said, "Wow, he's just so much better in terms of his day-to-day functioning. The way they find him, he's sharper. He's and so it's so the other thing is it's not so much about. I mean, the MOCA, it's nice for me to see, okay, there was an improvement, but it's also very important for the family members and for them to see some improvement. And with that, that's actually, and he's now decided, right, he's actually going to take it a step further and actually stick to things a bit more strictly. He wasn't completely strict with what I told him and the supplements, but he did quite a lot. And so what I've realized as well, and I've got patients of varying stages. So I had someone who was really just sitting in the chair, not really doing much, not interacting much, just watching the TV, sleeping a lot, and just changing her diet and introducing some supplements to her basic things. Her family noticed she was now alert. She wasn't sleeping in the chair anymore. She would ask some questions, answer some questions appropriately. So it's more about them showing more lucid moments and just being more with it on a more permanent basis. And so for family members, that's incredible. so to go from having your mom just sleeping and not really being your mom anymore to having moments where she's actually interacting and some appropriate moments. That's been wonderful. And what I've loved, I realize I love working with the elderly, and what I've loved is the patient and family interactions. And it's lovely to see. I had one woman who came in with her daughter, and then the next time, and then they went away, and 6 weeks later they came back with the husband. And I mean, they're in their mid-70s and they live in Fishhook, and they were lovely. Suddenly he came and he was so enthusiastic about what he'd done. He was like the food police, I'm telling you. He wasn't letting a morsel of anything we hadn't discussed pass her lips. And in that time, the family said, wow, she'd been repeating herself a lot. She was getting lost in her own home. That wasn't happening anymore. And she was just a lot sharper. So that's been so wonderful to see how important obviously the family unit is, and how having a very committed daughter and husband can really go a long way to changing things. I think what's quite exciting, I'm going to have 2 patients on the protocol that are enrolling, so and they will have had their genetics done, so that I look forward to reporting in another 6 months or so on some of the case studies, and especially with working with the protocol and how that's gone.
Amazing. I mean, it's an amazing story, and I remember hearing Bresden Dale talk, and one of the things he always talks about is, can you hear me, Jules? Just checking. You should hear me. Julie, can you hear me? Okay, we'll carry on. I'm sure Julie will join us. I can
hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Is that and we'll start tying it up now. But when I heard Dale speak, one of the things that he said and was what you were just talking about, is around one of the greatest indicators of success in dealing with cognitive decline is the support of the family, both children and spouses, and that those that are alone and don't have that connection and the support, because a lot of these changes that need to happen, especially when there's cognitive decline, do need to be facilitated by the family, and that often is actually one of the most significant success is exactly as you described. Jules, I think we don't have questions. I think it's been absolutely amazing to hear what you've achieved, and it's really not a very long time, and I think it's 4 or 5 years. It's probably in total from beginning to end, and that's pretty amazing. I mean, to go from GP acute medicine to where you are now. I have absolutely no doubt that we'll be talking to you some more. I'd love to hear in 6 months' time how the 2 protocols went, the 2 patients who are going to do the breast protocol. And I think, it's about, I often say, even when you do the Manuka course, it's about finding the thing that resonates with you. So you can study Manuka and, 90% of it is just learning. And then there's an article, there's a case study, that just resonates with you and that is meaningful. And finding your area that really matters to you, I think is seeing some real success in how we work with patients. And, Julie's lucky enough to have found hers. I've had absolutely no doubt she'll have a significant impact on the people around her in the community. She really is. And she really has for many, many years in a GP space, and will continue to do that. But I really think that the next couple of decades, we'll see Julie go from strength to strength, become our very own Dale Bresden. So, Julie, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Putting your patients on hold. I'm sure they're sitting in the waiting room for you. And Jules,
thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me, and we'll chat soon. Thanks, Yael.
Okay. Thanks, Jules.
Bye.
So I just wanted to tie things up for today, and really, I think it's been a great webinar. I've certainly enjoyed it. I think it's had a perfect balance between some theory. Between understanding APOE, genetics, understanding how we talk to our patients, the kind of gravitas of it. We've heard from Craig, who's answered some fantastic questions for us on clinical implementation. You've heard about the course that Craig's going to be doing. And then talking to Julie and just getting the real story of how she found functional medicine, how from functional medicine she ended up going into a more cognitive space, and how she's built this clinical environment where she can still see patients in an acute manner, but can really have an impact on the community around her. And I can see that going from strength to strength. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to especially thank Annalie for the hard work done for the first presentation. It's kind of over in 40 minutes, but it takes a very long time to pull it together and to have that kind of knowledge to present to you. If you have any questions, you can still post them on the network. We'll do our best. If you want to follow up on any of the courses, let us know. We'll try to point you in the right direction. But mostly, I just want to thank you for joining us, and I hope it was extremely useful. Send us any comments you have. And of course, any ideas for future webinars where we can host something like this so we can really make an impact on what you're doing in your clinical practice. Otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of today.